Coming out today. Again, this is our Rules Monday. My name is Robert Duke. I'm the Director of Rules and Competitions for the Colorado Golf Association. We do these every Monday at 9 Mountain Time to kind of supplement our rules of golf learning for the wintertime. We cover about 12 rules each Monday, and we're recording these and we'll post these on the website. Today, we're going to look at penalty areas. This is not a long one. It's an important one, I think, because most courses have penalty areas of some kind. If you were watching the Masters this weekend, we saw this come into play a couple times late in the round with both Hideki Matsuyama and Xander Schauffele. So definitely had some penalty areas out there this weekend and had a few of those. So as we go, if you have any questions, just type them in the chat box and Ashley will help facilitate those when we have a break here and there. Otherwise, during those times, we'll just have you unmute and ask questions there too. At the end, when we're done, if there's a question I didn't answer about the rule today, we can chat about that. I'm not just going to leave right away when we're done. And then if there's a rule that just has nothing to do with this today, and again, you saw it on TV or something this weekend, that's fine too. We'll answer that as well. So we'll answer all your questions today. So thanks for hanging with us, and we will get started here. Again, these are penalty areas under Rule 17, and they're really broken into three parts here. There's options for a ball in a penalty area. There's options after playing a ball from the penalty area and it coming to rest in the penalty area. The 17.2 is this regression rule that we have. And then 17.3 is no relief under other rules for a ball in a penalty area. That one's very short. That just simply is kind of a catch-all to say, for an unplayable ball or movable obstruction around the course condition, you don't get relief for if your ball is in the penalty area. So we're going to spend most of our time on 17.1 and .2. 17.3 is just kind of, again, a catch-all there. So that's most of what we're going to look at today. Again, we start off with this is a specific area of the course. When we first started this series in Rule 8, we went through pretty in-depth what area the courses are and what they mean and how they apply to the rules. Again, it's very important to know what area of the course your ball is lying in, because that's how you apply the rules, right? So that's how well, can you ground your club? Well, if you're in the bunker, no. And any other area of the course, the answer is yes. We're going to see that today. Again, the general area, teeing area, bunker, penalty area, putting green, that's our game board, right? That's where our ball lies on the course. That's how we apply the rules. Today, again, we're talking about these penalty areas, and they are specific areas of the course, right? So they're usually defined or denoted by a red line or red stakes, or even by verbiage on a local rule sheet to say, hey, the tall grass left of 7, that's a penalty area. Again, this is a really good point to kind of look at here. Is it used to be these were water hazards. As we see in the picture here, we have number 3 with the circle around it down there at the bottom right. That's a pond. That's easily a penalty area. But now that we've added, the rules have added the area at the top on the left side of the fairway, that is now considered a penalty area if the committee marks it. So to keep the phrase water hazard wouldn't have made sense for that area right there in the fairway, because that contains no water, yet it's treated like a water hazard. So here's where the rules were growing on their own to say, okay, we can't just call these water hazards. These are the areas formerly known as water hazards, now penalty areas, right? So this is a good update in the wording. And you still see people, on TV, they'll say, oh, they hit it into the water hazard or the hazard. That's some overlap there, but they're all penalty areas. There's no more water hazards on the golf course. They're all penalty areas, but this is a good example of the rules, and a very big one here. Penalty areas, it's a specific area of the course changing to suit what the rules have done, right? All right, so again, when we start these rules, we're going to look at the purpose statement here, and the purpose statement for each rule is kind of the ethos of that rule. It's saying, well, in a broad view, here's what it's about. Again, not necessarily rule making, but it drills down specifically when we look at 17.1 and 17.2. So let's just read the purpose of the rule here, and that's how I like to start every rule, to say Rule 17 is a specific rule for penalty areas, which are bodies of water or other areas defined by the committee where a ball is often lost or unable to be played. For one penalty stroke, players may use specific relief options to play a ball from outside the penalty area. So here it's saying this is an area of the course that your ball, again, may be lost or unplayable. If you hit the ball in the pond, certainly it's unplayable. and they're conceding, yeah, you can get that ball out for one penalty stroke in a variety of ways based on the color, where the ball may be crossed, if there's a drop zone there. So again, this is kind of giving you a brief overview of what this rule is about before getting into specifics. So getting right into the rule, okay, well, options for a ball in a penalty area. And let's look at here, the first thing before we get into the rules is penalty areas are defined as either red or yellow. This affects the player's relief options, and it says further, see Rule 17.1. So again, we've got two penalty area options here. One is yellow and one is red. So yellow still exists. I get that question a lot that said, oh, well, in 2019, didn't the rules abolish the color yellow? The answer is no. And I think a prime example that we just saw this weekend was at Augusta on the second nine, hole number 12. That's yellow because that's structurally how the hole was designed to be played, to have the ball be played from this side of the creek and have it come to rest on that side of the creek. If the ball rolls back, which we see, and it's red, the player could drop up there. So here, whenever a ball has gone over the penalty area and come back or just splashed right in, you've got a drop zone, which is applicable, and you've got any of your penalty area options, which we'll look at. But that area will always be yellow. 16 is the same way. We saw that late in the round yesterday. If you watched, was Xander Schauffele hit it into the penalty area short left. If it was marked red, he could have dropped borderline on the green where the ball crossed in. Obviously, that's not how the hole was meant to be played. So yellow still exists. You see it out there a little bit, although 95% of all penalty areas are probably going to be red from now on. The way I look at it is if I'm marking a course, I think, I start off with the entire course should be red, except, okay, if we have some specific examples of where this should or could be yellow, then you think about yellow, but the default is red. Certainly anything near the teeing area or fairways is going to be red. The yellow, and this is not a rule per se, it's more of a rule of thumb when marking golf courses. Typically the yellow you're going to see closer to the putting surface, right? You're going to see that near the green. If you've got a pond right off the tee for 50 yards and then it's nothing, there's really no reason at all to mark that yellow because that's not integral to the integrity of the hole. You're going to be teeing off well over that usually. So again, just a footnote there, but still have two kinds of penalty area options, red and yellow. We're going to look at both of those here shortly. All right. So this is more of the definition here of the penalty area. It says a player may stand in a penalty area to play a ball outside the penalty area, including after taking relief from the penalty area. So we see this a lot where you take your two club links, and we'll get into that in a minute, but you take your two club links, and then when you drop the ball in your relief area, it rolls and comes to rest in the relief area, but your stance is in the penalty area, or you're standing in the penalty area. This is unlike an abnormal course condition, which we talked about last week, where you have to get your stance and swing in your entire golfing area right off of the abnormal course condition. That's not true here. So if you drop it and your stance is still in the penalty area, but your ball's in the relief area, that ball's in play. We'll see a picture of that later. But here it's very specific to say you're not getting a relief from that. In the same way, if you had hit your ball this far outside the penalty area and you were standing in the penalty area, you don't get relief for stance in a penalty area unless it's a no play zone, which we will also see. But just for your standard penalty area, your stance has nothing to do with it really, especially when taking relief. So there's a really important cliff note right here that says a player may stand, including after taking relief from the penalty area. So opposite of what we kind of looked at last week with abnormal course conditions, where you have to get so if you drop your ball and your stance is back on the cart path, you haven't taken complete relief, you need to keep going and take relief again. So here it says specifically in the beginning of the rule here in 17.1, before you even get into anything, hey, your stance is not included in the relief area here, so don't worry about that. And I'll call this out later when we have a good picture of that. All right, so again, if you wanted to know what a penalty area was, and you looked in Rule 17, you're not going to find it. You got to go to the definitions where it has a very good definition of what is a penalty area. Again, we'll see that italicized in the rule of Rule 17, but here we have penalty area, right? And this is a definition. So a penalty area is simply an area from which relief with a one-stroke penalty is allowed if the player's ball comes to rest there, or to kind of add known or virtually certain to come to rest there, which we do get into in the rule later. A penalty area is, and it's going to give you some items here, any body of water on the course, whether or not marked by the committee. So even if the committee misses a pond and forgets to mark the pond, by definition, that's a penalty area. The relief area that we established is going to be a little more guesswork and more of a guesstimate than if it was actually painted, including a sea, lake, pond, river, ditch, surface drainage ditch, or other open water course, even if not containing water. So this is kind of the carryover from a water hazard, right? From the old rules. Now we have a penalty, and it kind of brings that in. This was kind of our guidance last time when it says, okay, a penalty or a water hazard rather is something that contains or was designed to be contained water, even if it doesn't actually contain water. So if we have a river, but the river is dry, that doesn't make it not a penalty area because there doesn't happen to be river water in there because it's a dry season or something. So in this case, it's still going to be a penalty area because the definition says that. Again, typically the course is going to have it marked, or the committee is going to have it marked with red lines and stakes that says, yes, this is the penalty area. And more importantly, here's where it is not the penalty area. So usually general area, and here's exactly where it becomes penalty area. We'll see more of that later when we get about marking. Any other part of the course the committee defines the penalty area. So this is that looped in area that 2019 kind of yielded to say, okay, a penalty area is not just the water areas, it's also anything the committee says, yes, that's a penalty area. So in this case, the committee at any given point, as long as it's theoretically not another area of the course, could say this area, a specific area of the course rather, this area is a penalty area. And they could loop it up and say, yeah, this area of tall grass left of the fairway, penalty area. Used to be it had to contain water. Now there's a lot more freedom. And because of that, which we'll see later, there's a lot more percentage that someone's going to play a ball out of a now marked penalty area, because we've added these dry penalty areas or any other part of the course that we see here that the committee defines as a penalty area. So this is the new rule here more so. So the penalty area, and we're still in the definition here, is one of the 5 defined areas of the course, which we've seen already. It's a specific area, one of the 4 specific areas. It says there are 2 different types of penalty areas distinguished by the color used to mark them, right? And we saw yellow penalty area, and they have 2 relief options under 17.1D1 and 2, which we'll look at. And then we have the red penalty area, which is marked by red lines or stakes, and it gives an extra lateral relief. So it's kind of hinging off of the yellow. So red penalty area, if you want to think about it in an easier way, is yellow +1, or yellow penalty area relief with the additional lateral. That's the way to distinguish red versus yellow. That's the only really thing that matters. What makes yellow yellow and makes red red is that extra lateral relief option. That's when you might take away a red and add a yellow, because, well, we don't want to give the player that extra relief option for lateral because of the layout of the hole, which, again, without having specifics, I can't really say. But again, that's the distinguished area between yellow and red, is the extra lateral relief option. And then again, it says in addition to the 2. So it's yellow plus lateral equals red, essentially. If the color of the penalty area has not been marked or indicated by the committee, it is treated as a red penalty area. So again, if there's a pond that just didn't get marked, or the committee missed it, or a stream or something, that happens sometimes. There's a little stream that you maybe didn't see, and a player's ball comes into that. Well, if it's clearly a penalty area based on, okay, it's a drainage ditch, let's say, or a stream, then it's treated as a penalty area. Not only that, we have to distinguish, is it yellow or red? The rules, again, are going to default to red. So if you get to a golf course and it's not marked at all, and you get to a place that's clearly, by definition, a penalty area, it is a red penalty area. And we'll see how to cover that in 17.1D1, 2, and 3. All right, so looking at the penalty area, now we're going to define what is and what is not a penalty area. You're still in the definition of penalty area here. It's a long definition. It's the edge of a penalty area, extends both up above the ground and down below the ground. So there's a plane that goes way up and way down below the ground that says this is and this is not in a penalty area. We saw last week that ground under repair doesn't do that except for anything planted in and growing out. Out of bounds and penalty areas share that. And we get into out of bounds next week, actually. Out of bounds and penalty areas share that, where the plane of the penalty area and or out of bounds runs both up and down below the ground. So this means that all ground and anything else, such as any natural or artificial objects inside the edge, is part of the penalty area, whether on, above, or below the surface of the ground. So that's all encompassing. Anything within the penalty area is in the penalty area, right? And it says if an object is both inside and outside the edge of a penalty area, such as a bridge over the penalty area, or a tree rooted inside the edge with branches extending outside the edge, or vice versa, only the part of the object that is inside the edge of the penalty area is part of the penalty area. So conversely, last week we saw the ground under repair, right, where if it was rooted in and it grew out, that was still in the GUR. In this case, if a tree is in the penalty area and then part of it's out of the penalty area, that branch out of the penalty area is not in the penalty area. It's very much a solid plane going up and down based on where the committee has delineated penalty area, not penalty area. Again, typically and ideally it's with that line or yellow or red line. So again, it's declaring when an object is and is not in a penalty area, and kind of gives us a broad view of that. And it says the edge of the penalty area should be defined by stakes, lines, or physical features. So here it's giving guidance to maybe the committee to say, here's how you should mark it, right? Typically we see stakes, anytime you're at an event, a CGA event, a USGA event, a lot of clubs, if it's a men's or women's league championship, they're going to have lines down, and the line is very official. This is saying, this is the green grass over here. That's not penalty area. Anything red or yellow and over, that is in the penalty area. So that's the 100% best way to do it, is putting a line down that very much says penalty area, not penalty area. When you have stakes, it can get a little iffy. Again, it's in broad strokes, it does the job, but lines are the key end all be all. That's 100% definition. And so it's going to tell us when stakes are using stakes to define the penalty area. When defined by stakes, the edge of the penalty area is defined by the line between the outside points of the stakes at ground level, and the stakes are inside the penalty area. So you have a stake in the ground and you have another stake in the ground. The penalty area, you'd go to the general area side maybe, and that edge, the outside edge, and that outside edge, that's the line of the penalty area. That straight line is penalty area, not penalty area, right? So that's inside the penalty area, anything on that side of it. And the stakes are in, and that's the best way to look at it, I think, is when you look at, and the stakes are inside the penalty area. That's a good way to think of it. So the edge of that stake, that's outside, stake is inside. So anytime you have a stake, that's inside the penalty area. Lines, when defined by a painted line on the ground, which is ideal, the edge of the penalty area is the outside edge of the line, and the line itself is in the penalty area. So this is a good point to say, if you have a ball that's resting half on the green grass side of the general area, and then part of the ball is touching a red line, that ball is always considered in the penalty area, because it says here, the line itself is in the penalty area. So that line where it starts from green grass, red line, that little bit of line there, that's all inside. So if any part of the ball is touching red or touching yellow as far as the line goes, that is inside the penalty area. Same would go if a ball was resting, if there were not lines being used, if there were only stakes, if the ball was resting against a stake, it's touching something that is by definition inside the penalty area. That ball is also technically inside the penalty area, and we see that. And then the last thing is physical features. This is when defined by physical features such as a beach or desert or a retaining wall, which the committee could say the wall left of wall number 7, that defines the penalty area. It's what I just said. The committee should say how the edge of the penalty area is defined. Not ideal. When you leave it to verbiage, you have to write it down somewhere on the scorecard of the local rules. If you put lines down, you don't have to write on the local rules, hey, the red line is a penalty area. Everybody knows that. That's in the rule 17 here. So that's a good way to kind of consolidate wording, is I don't have to tell you that red and yellow lines are penalty area lines. That's part of the rules. If we're using physical features, now the committee, I should probably tell you that so you know what that is. And it says when the edge of the penalty area is defined by lines or physical features, stakes may be used to show where the edge of the penalty area is, but they have no other meaning. So in a broad term, we would say that lines define and stakes identify, right? So stakes are saying, hey, from 200 yards away, there's a penalty area over here. You might not see the water necessarily, but hey, there's a red stake. That's identifying it. When we get up there, if you've got a red stake that's a foot outside the line and the ball is in between the stake and the line, maybe that ball's not in the penalty area. When we have lines on the ground, that's judge, jury. That's it right there. The lines will always be the defining feature. The stakes are there just for, hey, we're here, penalty area, watch out. That's identifying, right? And it says when the edge of a body of water is not defined by the committee, so the committee forgets to mark it, the edge of that penalty area is defined by its natural boundaries. That is where the ground slopes down to form the depression that can't hold water. So, and this also, what it does is it gives people that mark golf courses. So if you're out there and you mark your golf course, this gives us a little bit of a guidance in the definition here of how to mark it, because if it wasn't marked, the edge of that penalty area is defined by its natural boundaries. So the way I look at it is, if you got a pond or a lake or a stream or something, and it very much, drops down, think of it like the edge of a bathtub, right? Where would the water, when it comes, start to overflow out of the bathtub? That kind of edge right there. And it's not an exacting science. It's within a couple feet of that. That's where the edge of the penalty area should be. And when you're marking, you're giving a little bit of credence. Okay, well, if a player does hit it in here, we need to make sure that we get the line off a little bit, because they get there potentially 2 club lengths. If it's a red penalty area, we want to make sure that we're getting them out of jail. So we want to give them a little bit of air off of that. But here it's giving you a little guidance to say where the ground naturally slopes to form that bathtub or whatever. That's where the edge of the penalty area should be. That's where you should paint it. So usually it's fairly obvious where that is. And again, it's not an exact science, but this is some good guidance here. And it says if an open water course usually does not contain water, such as a drainage ditch or runoff area that is dry except during a rainy season, the committee may define that as part of the general area, which means it is not a penalty area. It is not a specific area of the course. This is guidance for the committee. The player doesn't necessarily need to worry about this, because it's either a penalty or not, based on what the committee decides in this case. All right, so let's look at 17.1. We're going to get into, now we know what a penalty area is. We're going to look at applying now the rules for the penalty area. Because a ball is in a penalty area when any part of the ball, and when we look at any part of the ball, like I said earlier, if there's a line on the ground and there's one dimple of that ball, again, any part of the ball, it doesn't say 25%, it doesn't say 50, it doesn't say most, or it doesn't say all of the ball. It says any part of the ball. So again, one dimple is touching that red, and we're going to assume for most of these purposes that there's a red line on the ground. That if any part of the ball is touching the red, that ball is in the penalty area. That's how you define it. If it's not, then it's in whatever the area of the course it's lying in. And it says if any part of the ball lies on or touches the ground or anything else, such as a natural or artificial object, inside the edge of the penalty area. So like I said earlier, if there's not lines and there's just stakes and the ball is touching or leaning on a stake, the ball is lying or touching the ground or anything else, a natural object, inside the edge of the penalty area, that's in the penalty area. Is above the edge or any other part of the penalty area. So like we saw earlier, that penalty area, the plane extends up and down from wherever that line on the ground is, let's say. So if a ball is in a tree and it's inside that plane of the penalty area, it doesn't matter where the tree's rooted in this case, it's looking at where the ball is. Again, this rarely happens, if ever. I mean, it's pretty, almost not worth mentioning, but it's in there. So we're going to talk about it. If part of the ball is both in a penalty area and another area of the course, see Rule 2.2c. So let's look at that rule. We looked at that really early in Rule 8, but this is where we're going to see that the penalty area in this case is essentially the top dog. Anytime a ball is in the penalty area, that's the area of the course it's in. And we're going to see that the rules tell us that here. In Rule 2.2c, so let's look at that. And this is a little clip here. It says a ball is always treated as lying in only one area of the course. So of the 5 areas, a ball could be lying in multiple areas, right? Usually general area, penalty area, if it's on the line, it's touching both areas, but we have to treat it in order to apply the rules in one. And it says if part of the ball is both in the general area and one of the 4 specific areas of the course, it is treated as lying in that specific area of the course. So in this case, penalty area is higher than the general area, of course. And it says if part of the ball is in 2 specific areas of the course, meaning if it's on the penalty area and a putting green, which rare, penalty area or bunker, could happen. We have some of those beaches sometimes that fade right into a penalty area. We have it at Fort Collins Country Club for the U.S. Amateur Qualifier every year. That is 2 specific areas of the course. It is treated as lying in the specific area that comes first in this kind of pecking order: penalty area, bunker, putting green. So in this case, penalty area is always on top. So if it's penalty area, general area, we see here specific area always wins out. And if it's penalty area, anything else. So penalty area is always, always, always top of the list there. So we always have that. This is covered in Rule 2.2c, like we've seen here. So now we know penalty area, that's number 1 all the time. Again, here we have that hierarchy here. Penalty area is always first. Again, it's kind of hard to have this situation happen. It does, certainly, like I said, when you have a bunker that kind of feeds into a pond, maybe, which we do. Or in Florida, maybe there's more, not oceans, but more ponds down there. I've seen that a decent amount more than I have here. So anyways, 17.1b, so moving through 17.1, the player may play a ball as it lies in a penalty or take penalty early. So when we talk about the options for penalty, the first one is you can always play it, right? If your ball is playable and you want to play it, again, we saw this at the Masters this weekend. It was funny. Billy Horschel hit it into the creek on 13 and went to go play it, and he took his shoes off and fell and went down the hill, and Phil was right there, and they were getting a good laugh out of it. But Billy went down there and played it out of the penalty area because it was half submerged in water. It was playable. So you can play it out of the penalty area. It's just typically if the committee has defined an area as a penalty area, I mean, 99% of the time, if a ball is in the penalty area, it's in the penalty area. We see that again at Augusta when, like on 16, if a ball is in that penalty area, there's no way for it to not, be in the water most of the time. If it's in, it's in. So typically we're taking relief. But like we've seen, if your ball's in a little bit or it's touching that line, you can always certainly play it. The only exception for that really is if that area is defined as a no play zone, that penalty area, which we see later in 17.1 about no play zones. But otherwise, you can play the ball to the penalty area. And this is also going to increase because, as we saw earlier, now that penalty areas are not just defined water hazards, like we used to call it, and a committee can say, well, this dry area of tall grass or wooded area is a penalty area, the likelihood and the percentage that a ball can be played out of that drier area is going to go up. A player, if they find their ball, they're certainly going to want to play it usually, unless it's just in a bad lie or a bad angle, and they could take relief out for the penalty stroke. But here we're seeing we can play it as it lies. So here we see the player may either play the ball as it lies without penalty under the same rules that apply to a ball in the general area, which means, and this is a new change in 2020 and 2019, it says it means there are no special rules limiting how a ball may be played from a penalty area, meaning the player can ground their club, they can remove loose impediments as long as their ball doesn't move. They can take practice swings, they can move movable obstructions, obviously. They can move those penalty area stakes because those penalty area stakes, unless they're cemented into the ground, are movable obstructions typically. So again, when your ball's in a penalty area, it's no different than playing your ball from the general area, except that your ball being in the penalty area, you have an option to take it out for a penalty stroke. But as far as just straight up playing it, like when we saw Billy Horschel doing that, maybe, he can ground his club in the penalty area, he can hit the water, as long as it doesn't cause his ball to move, he's going to be fine. So we see that there's no difference here when playing a ball from the general area or the penalty area. Or the player can play the ball from outside the penalty area by taking relief under 17.1d or 17.2. 17.2 is that regression rule where you've played a ball from the penalty area, didn't make a good shot, it's still in the penalty area. Now what do we do? And then it says exception, which we talk about in 17.1e, is relief must be taken from interference by a no play zone in a penalty area. And that's that green topped area that sometimes we see as an ESA or something like that, typically is what we see there. So 17.1c, so it'll get relief for a ball not found in the penalty area. So if a player's ball has not been found and it is known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in a penalty area, so meaning when we see known or virtually certain, read it as if a player's ball has not been found and it is 95% certain that the ball came to rest in a penalty area. So on a scale of knowledge of virtual certainty, if I hit a ball and I see it splash in the penalty area, just right in the middle, I have knowledge of virtual certainty because I am 100% sure that ball is in the penalty area. 17.1c applies. Again, there's times where if I hit the ball down the fairway on a dry day and it goes over a hill on a course I've not played before, and I hit a really good drive and I hit it 275 and I get up over the hill and at 220, there's a massive pond there right where my ball was headed. Although I didn't see it go into the penalty area based on how I hit it and the topography maybe, and it's hard and firm and it just rolled right in or something, or I flew it in. We can say, although I didn't see it, there's knowledge of virtual certainty. Another way to look at it is if I'm officiating, I would ask a player, I'd say, is there anywhere else this ball could be other than the penalty area? If the answer is no, it's got to be in the penalty area, there's no other logical place the ball could be, I'm 90, then okay, we're going to take penalty area relief. Your ball's known or virtually certain to be in the penalty area. We're going to see next week, if you're not known or virtually certain the ball is in the penalty area, the ball is going to be lost. This rule kind of yields that later. We're not going to talk about that today. That's again a big one next week for lost ball and out of bounds and stroke and distance. But if it is not known it's in the penalty area, then I can't take relief. So if I hit the ball 300 yards down the fairway and there's a little stream that runs next to the fairway, but there's a lot of trees and there's a lot of bushes and tall grass, and it's a very narrow penalty area. It's only 10 paces wide, and I hit a tree on the fly, and I hear it rattle around. I go up there. There's a lot of places that ball could be that's not in the penalty area. And, again, as a player, if I search for 3 minutes outside the penalty area, and this is for officials, a way to kind of gauge this, if a player looks for 3 solid minutes outside the penalty area, typically when they say, well, I can't find it, it must be in here. It's like, well, but you looked for that long thinking it could be out there. And again, based on the circumstances, we're going to say it's probably not known or virtually certain it's in the penalty area and you're not entitled to relief. So again, could the ball be anywhere else? Yeah, it could have hit the tree and I didn't see it land and it's really narrow. Okay, even though you didn't find it and you might think it is on 50-50, we got to be, like we see here, 95% certain that the ball came to rest in a penalty area. So there's a knowledge of virtual certainty principle that's very key here. See this a lot on golf courses that have narrow, thick penalty areas, kind of like I just said. We have big ponds, those are easy. I saw my ball go in or it can't be anywhere else, totally fine. Like again, this weekend when we looked at Hideki on Sunday, he flew the green on 15. He can't see that pond down there, but with the heat, he hit the ground on the fly, it goes in. Now, obviously, there's hundreds of people that saw it go in, but if he was playing by himself, with the way he hit it and how mown down it is, he's like, yeah, I hit a 3-wood and it caught the downslip on the fly. I didn't see it go in this pond on 16, but of course it's going to be there because it can't be anywhere else. That's knowledge of virtual certainty. That's a good one. It says the player may take penalty relief if it's knowledge of virtual certain that the ball's in the penalty area under Rule 17.1D or 17.2, which we'll see. So we're still in the area of establishing, is the ball in or is it not in the penalty area? Okay, we're finding out it is. Here's what the penalty area relief rules are going to be. Once the player puts another ball in play, take relief in this way, as in it's known or virtually certain the ball is in the penalty area, even if I didn't see it come in there, it's known or virtually certain. I put a ball in play. The original ball is no longer in play and must not be played because you can only have one ball in play at a time. So I've put a ball in play under knowledge of virtual certainty, which is covered in Rule 6.3, which we won't get into, but I put a ball in play under knowledge of virtual certainty. That's my ball in play. The other original ball is no longer in play. And this is true even if it is found on the course before the end of the 3-minute search. And then see 6.3b. So if I hit it into a pond and let's say I didn't see it come in there and I hit it and I said, well, it's known or virtual certain to be in here, but and I put a ball in play under knowledge of virtual certainty, I take back on a line relief, whatever. And then, actually it hit a turtle and on the shell and it bounced in the middle of the pond, it bounced over. And it's up there now. Again, I put a ball in play when it was known or virtually certain what happened to that ball. I was 95% sure that is now binding. I must play that ball that I put into play as it lies. That other ball is like any other golf ball on the course right now. It's the wrong ball. It's not my ball in play. I can't play it. This ball's in play. This happens a decent amount, actually. And it happened at the Colorado Golf, the senior amateur championship this last year at Perry Park. And a player did this and actually went and played his original ball because it bounced out and ended up getting disqualified, actually, because it was a wrong ball and he teed off on the next hole. Unfortunate. But this happens. This is a real life situation. This does happen more than you'd think. It says again, but it is not known or virtually certain that the ball came to rest in the penalty area. So it's 50-50. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And the ball is lost. The player must take stroke and distance relief under 18.2, which again, we cover next week. So again, here it's talking about, hey, if it's known or virtually certain, take penalty relief. If it's not 95% certain, you're not entitled to penalty relief. You got to know it's in there 95% or more. And even if it's not, and it says, in that second little bullet point there, under the second bullet point, it says this is true even if it is then found. So it's yielding there to say, okay, even though you're 95% sure, there's that 5% chance that it hit that turtle shell on the fly and bounced over the penalty area or whatever, and the ball wasn't in the penalty area. This doesn't change the fact that when you put the ball in play, it was 95% or known or virtually certain to have been in the penalty area. So again, 95% certain, that's our key here. All right, so in 17.1D, now we're going to look at, okay, the ball's in the penalty area, and now we're going to take relief for the ball in the penalty because it's either 95% or more or it's 100%. I just saw it go in. That's knowledge of virtual certainty right there. It says if a player's ball is in a penalty area, including when it is known or virtually certain to be in a penalty area, even though not found, so that's 17.1C we're just covering there, the player has these relief options, each for one penalty stroke. So the first option is stroke and distance. The second option is back on the line relief. And then the third option is lateral relief. And it says right there, you see, only for a red penalty area. That's the difference between, we have lateral relief there, between yellow, that's options 1 and 2, and then we have red, that's the third option. That loops in, that's the difference in yellow and red. So again, yellow are those two, and then red is just yellow plus lateral relief. That's what makes red red. Obviously, and we saw it this weekend at the Masters, is there are some areas where we're going to have drop zones, right? And we don't cover that because the drop zone is just an additional relief option. So if it's on a local rule sheet, the way I'd word that is, say, if a ball is known or virtually certain to be a penalty area on hole 13, the player may use the drop zone located XYZ as an additional relief option for 1 penalty stroke. So if you don't want to use these 2 options because none of them are good, or the 3 options because you don't like any of them, there's a drop zone available. Go to the drop zone, totally fine. They don't include it here because that's a local rule. But again, drop zones, as we know, are part of the rules there when in play. So the first one is stroke and distance relief, right? So the player may play the original ball or another ball from where the previous stroke was made. When we think stroke and distance for a penalty area, we think of 10 Cup, right? The end of the movie there. If you haven't seen it, sorry, but he hits it into the penalty area a lot, and he keeps trying to hit the shot again, taking stroke and distance, dropping it at the spot he last played it. That's this concept here. A little bit different since that movie was filmed, obviously, but again, that's the first one, is stroke and distance relief for a ball in a penalty area, which is, and again, it says see Rule 14.6, which here we have the 5 options for playing a ball under stroke and distance, and this is in Rule 14.6. If you played it from the teeing area, so from the teeing area, I hit it into a pond, I play my stroke and distance from the teeing area that I played from. I can re-tee it, obviously change clubs probably, and move it around the teeing area. That's fine. If the ball is played from the general area, bunker, or penalty area, so one of those 3 areas of the course, it's the spot from where the ball was last played. And this middle picture is really good. The spot from where the ball was last played plus 1 club length, no closer to the hole, in the same area of the course. If it's a bunker or penalty area, it's the same bunker or penalty area. And you get to drop a ball within 1 club length there. Used to be you had to drop it as near as possible to the spot you last played from. That's a little difficult. This one is saying you get a club length. So let's say you played it from the rough area and you were a foot in the rough and a foot outside the rough was fairway. If it meets these stipulations, we don't care about the cut of grass necessarily. We're looking at what area the course was it in, right? So in this case, you could drop it then in the fairway if it's within 1 club length. Again, you get a club length, general area, penalty area, bunker. If it was in the bunker, like we learned about in Rule 12, you could rake the bunker and then drop the ball to have a better lie this time, maybe in your relief area. That's totally fine. And then on the putting green, this happened. The Tiger did this on 13 years ago, above the hole, putted it, and it went down into the creek, stroke and distance, because otherwise you'd have to drop it on the other side of the creek because it's a yellow penalty area. He placed the ball and re-putted it because that's stroke and distance on the putting green. This happens a decent amount. So again, putting green there, place it. The second option is back on a line relief. And then the player may drop a ball here. And this is that point of entry, and we'll get through that, obviously. The player may drop the original ball or another ball. It's saying you can use a separate ball, obviously, because if you're taking this relief, your ball is probably at the bottom of a pond or a creek or stream. So you're not using the original ball. You can, but you don't have to, obviously. It says in a relief area that is based on a reference line going straight back from the hole through the estimated point where the original ball last crossed the edge of the penalty area. There is a clarification here. We're not going to cover that. It's extremely complicated and a little convoluted, to be honest. And it's in play as a local rule. If you really want to look at it, check it out. Otherwise, as long as you operate under how the rules say to do it, which is pretty easy, you're going to be fine. We're not going to get into the clarification there. Again, so what we're looking at here is when we have a penalty area, where did the ball last cross the edge of the penalty area? And when we look at last cross, it could have crossed the penalty area 3 times, right? Let's look at Augusta 12, for instance, right? The par 3, the ball goes over the first line, over the second line, hits on the bank and spins back in. That's the 3rd time it crossed. That's what we're looking at. It's the last time it crossed. So if it goes over a yellow line or over a red line and spins back in any which way, that's where it last crossed. So really, you can even fleece it out and say where it last crossed from one area of the course into the penalty area, right? So sometimes it's just one. You just bomb it in off the tee and it crosses into the pond and goes in. That's one area. That's where it last crossed. But sometimes you have 1, 2, spin, hit back, 3. That's where it's last crossed. The reference point, and it's a point on the course chosen by the player that is on the reference line. And again, to go back real quick, it's where it last crossed. It doesn't matter at all where the ball lies. It doesn't matter at all the line of flight. That's a made-up thing. It's where did the ball last cross the edge of the penalty, which we've already seen is established by the committee to paint a line on the ground. So if I was officiating, I'd say where did the ball last cross, put a tee in the ground. We'll go through our flag stick and line up here. But again, line of flight and where the ball currently lies have nothing to do with it. Where does it last cross, like we just saw? And the reference point here is a point on the course chosen by the player that is on the reference line and is farther from the hole than the estimated point with no limit on how far back on the line. So, and it's a point on the course. So it's outside that you're already in. And what, again, we have a line now. The reference line it's referring to here is where the ball last crossed the penalty area, and the flag stick that creates a line. Go back on that line as far as you want, choose a reference point, and it's on that line on the course. So we have to be somewhere in one of the other 4 defined areas of the course. You can't be in the same penalty area. That's the only stipulation here, really. You could drop it in a bunker if you wanted to. So in choosing this reference point, the player should indicate this point by using an object such as a tee. We're going to see a really good explanation for this in a picture in the rule book here in a moment. But again, flag stick, reference point, going back as far, or reference line, or they're going back as far as you want to go on that line. You choose a reference point. You can use a tee. There is a clarification or later on in an interpretation rather that says if you want to mentally choose it, say that tough to grass, that's fine too. Ideally, you're saying tee in the ground, reference point. And then we see what we always see, right? We see the 1 club length no closer to the hole, and we'll have a good picture of that in a moment. Again, it says should indicate. You don't have to. It says ideally you do, but it's not saying must. You're not penalized if you don't physically put a tee in the ground. Again, I can mentally do it. Again, you're kind of showing your work here if you put a tee in the ground. That's usually nice. So if a player drops the ball without having chosen this point, the reference point is treated as being the point on the line that is the same distance from the hole as where the drop ball first touched the ground. So if you have your reference line, again, flag stick where the ball last crossed, that line goes back infinity as far back as you want to go. If you don't pick a spot and just drop it near that line, the reference point is by default chosen for you on that part of the line no closer to the hole where you dropped it. So again, this is why it's saying in the first little arrow there, you should choose it so you don't have to look at the second bullet point. And then again, we see our relief area measured from the reference point. It's 1 club length. Again, when we see club length, we see the length of the longest club of the 14 or fewer clubs the player has during the round, other than a putter. So 99% of the time, this is your driver or 3-wood or whatever metal wood you might carry in your bag. That's the longest club for me, 43 inches. That's what I read. I read 43 inches is the club length for me for 1 club length from that reference point. And it says, but with these limits, the relief area has limits on where it can and cannot be. It says it must be near the hole, must not be near the hole rather than the reference point. So when you choose your reference point on the ground, you put the tee in the ground, it can't be nearer than that. You've chosen your reference point now. And maybe in any area of the course, except the same penalty, like I had said earlier. So technically, if you wanted to drop it in a bunker and it's on that reference line going back as far as you want to go, you can drop it in a bunker, totally fine. You could drop it on a putting green. That's totally fine too. Usually that math or the angle doesn't line up. So that's something else, but you can technically do that. Any area of the course except the same penalty. It's pretty broad there. Again, 90% of the time, 95, 99% of the time, it's going to be in the general area on a good lie, hopefully. And if more than one area of the course is located within the 1 club length on the reference point, the ball must come to rest in the relief area in the same area of the course that the ball first touched when dropped in the relief area. So if you've got a straight line back and you say, this is my reference point, it's right next to a bunker, and the bunker is technically within your 1 club length from that reference point, you can drop it in the bunker. But again, you've got that 1 club length. The ball has to land and come to rest in the bunker. If the ball is dropped in the relief area and then rolls in the bunker, here we're saying that if there's more than one area of the course within the 1 club length, the ball must land and come to rest in the same area of the relief area that it struck when it first hit the ground. So if it goes general area to bunker, we're outside the relief area under this third arrow point here, and we're redropping it. And if it was dropped in the right way, we're doing it one more time, rolls the bunker, now we're placing it. So it's establishing within the relief area, there are parameters. Again, this doesn't happen that much, but it can happen. So again, here's a really good diagram from the rule book, right? So we see a player from the fairway. That's their first option. They dump it in the penalty area there. They can always replay that stroke. That's that 10 cup scenario, right? Kind of even looks like it in the picture here. The second option would be to where did the ball last cross? That's point X, right? Nobody cares about where the ball lies or the line of flight. Where did the ball cross? From that point, we've got the flag sticking that point. And we see that little black dotted line. You can go back as far as you want to go. And again, look, the player, they didn't go immediately behind the penalty area. They went back 15, 20 yards maybe where the 2 is. And they get a flat or lie. It's in the fairway cut, it looks like. So again, far back as you want to go on that line, you get a club length. So it's a little slider that goes all the way back. You can drop it. Again, tee in the ground. From there, 1 club, no closer to the hole. Drop it. We're good. So that's all for, obviously, 1 penalty stroke. So here we have 2 potential relief areas going there. And really, you know, the relief area on the reference line goes back pretty far. So it's a very big corridor of relief area, potential relief area. And again, good picture here. This is showing, this is in the rule book. Again, good change to the rules that they added these pictures here that are really helpful to explain what they mean. Here's a good video for that. And I'm just going to talk over it. So player, she hits her ball in the penalty area. There's knowledge of virtual certainty. That's 100%. So the ball's in the penalty area. She's going to establish where did it last cross. And she does the little arm alignment thing, which is proper officiating technique. So ball crossed there, flag stick, go back as far as you want to go, right? And again, she could drop it closer, but that's in the rough on a down slope. Go a little bit farther back. Now, she's not going to do it with her tee, which is okay. It says you should, but she's going to mentally identify, this is my reference point, this is my relief area, and now she's going to drop a ball from knee height in 1 club length of that and no closer to the hole than that one she mentally picked right there. So she didn't physically do it, but okay, that's fine. Ball's in play. That's a 1-stroke penalty, as we know. Again, she could have gone back way farther. Let's say this is 85 yards, and we see this on TV a lot where players lay up to a certain yardage or take relief to a certain yardage. So in this case, let's say it was 85 yards, but hey, from 100 yards, she has a gap wedge that she is really good with. Great, go back to 100 yards, get your proper yardage you want on that line, and then drop it. So there's some player option. There's a little bit of strategy involved here with where you want to drop your ball and put it in play. If you've just got that club that you're great with, then do that. But again, she's being smart here in general, just going back a little bit. She's got that flat lie on the fairway now. That ball's in play, and we're good here. So that's the yellow penalty area, or red, obviously. And 17.13, now we're looking at the lateral relief, and this is only for a red penalty area. We see it here, right, in parentheses. This is when the ball last crossed the edge of a red penalty area, the player may drop the original ball or another ball in this lateral relief area, right? So again, only for a red penalty area. The reference point is the estimated point where the original ball last crossed the edge of the red penalty area. So again, if a ball goes into a high hooking shot into a penalty area, doesn't matter where it lies, doesn't matter the line of flight, where did it last break that plane? Remember, that goes up and down. Where did it last break that plane to go into the penalty area? And again, it could be 3. It could be over 1, hits and rolls back on a red penalty area. That's where it last crossed. That's the reference point, right? And the size of the relief area measured from the reference point is 2 club lengths, but with these limits. So here we get 2 club lengths, again, 2 drivers for me. So in this count, I get 43 times 2, 86 inches to have my relief area. We have these limits. Again, so here's a good picture of it before we get to the limits. We have the reference point. So the ball last crossed the red penalty, used his driver there to measure 1, 2 club lengths, no closer to the hole. Again, and he's a lefty here, but if he were right-handed and he dropped his ball in the relief area and it rolled and stayed in the relief area, but he would theoretically be standing in the penalty area, as we saw right at the beginning of 17.1, that doesn't matter. The ball's in the relief area. We're good. We're not worried about his stance. for a penalty area, except again, if it was a no play zone, maybe. But otherwise, we're not worried about that. That's the relief area. Someone asked last week why cart paths were 1 club length and red penalty areas are 2. And at the time, I didn't really know, and I thought a little more about it. And I think just for me, the answer is to get you out of that trouble there, because if your stance is also not included in your taking relief, if you put that red line, you have a club length and it's really close to the water, let's say, you could have a situation where a player, when taking a penalty stroke to get relief, their ball is this far in their relief area and this far inside of the penalty line, and they're standing in the penalty area. I think this is just to give a player a little bit more breathing room to get out of the penalty area they just hit in. You're taking a 1-stroke penalty. Let's get you out. That's why I think there's 2. It's kind of a flow from tradition, I think, but I don't know where it started. That's the only reason I can think to make it 2 instead of universally everything is 1 club length. But this case, it's 2, which we see here. That's the reason I think why. Again, that's just my thoughts on it. I don't have anything official terribly, but that's why I think it's 2. That's what makes sense to me. Anyways, so again, the size of the relief area is 2 club lengths for the red penalty area, and the limits of the location on the relief area we see must not be near the hole in the reference points where the ball last crossed. Can't be near the hole in that, and maybe in any area of the course except the same penalty area. But, and again, the same penalty area, meaning it can be in any, it can be on a putting green, it can be in a bunker, it can be in the general area. The putting green is the big one. A lot of people get thrown off by that. If the layout is such where the ball crossed into the penalty area and 2 club lengths no closer to the hole, and part of the putting green is in that relief area, you can drop a ball on the putting green. Doesn't happen that much, but it technically could, because the only stipulation is it can't be in the same penalty area. That's the only thing it can't do. And then it says if one or more than one area of course is located within 2 club lengths of the reference point, the ball must come to rest in the relief area in the same area of the course that the ball first touched and dropped in the relief area. So just like we covered in back on the line relief, in the same way, if we have a bunker right next to a penalty area and there's a strip of general area running through it and then it's bunker, if the ball lands in the general area first in the relief area and then rolls into the bunker or back into the penalty area, we know that we have to drop it again based on this 3rd arrow point here. Has to stay in one area of the course when it lands and drops in the relief area and rolls around. It has to stay in that area. If it rolls out, we see here that's a correct drop, but it's rolled out of the prescribed relief area, like we see here, because it's in the limits, underneath the limits of the location relief area bullet point. So again, then we're dropping it again and then maybe placing it if it rolls out the second time. So all right, so now we're getting toward the end of this rule. So 17.1e, this is relief must be taken from interference from a no play zone in a penalty area. And this is, I guess, formerly, it's still an ESA you could have, and we'll see examples of that. But it says in each of these situations, the player must not play the ball as it lies. And again, we see the word must, meaning if you don't, then we're going to see later, rule 14.7 is going to kick in and you've played from a wrong place and you're going to be penalized even further. So again, must infers you do not have a choice. So again, the player must not play the ball as it lies. When the ball is in a no play zone in a penalty area, when a no play zone on the course interferes with stance or swing for a ball in the penalty area. So there's 2 areas here. And says when a ball is in the no play zone in the penalty area. In the first one here, it's when the ball is in the no play zone in the penalty area. And then the second one's, it's going to get stance or swing. So not all encompassing of a condition affecting the stroke, but kind of within that, we've got 2 parts of the ball itself, the lie, where does the ball lie? And then another one, okay, well, the ball doesn't lie in the penalty or in a no play zone, but my stances. So we're looking at ball first and then stance and swing. So 2 distinct little areas to keep an eye on in 17.1e here in 1 and 2. And it says when a ball is in a no play zone in a penalty area, the player must take penalty relief under 17.1d or 2. So typically, the no play zone, if they've done it right, is got, let's call it red penalty area sticks or yellow, and they've got the green tops on it. That is identifying a no play zone. There's a handful of courses in Colorado that have it here based on a variety of reasons. It could be safety, like, hey, there's a bunch of snakes that live down there, or it's a wetland area that's protected by the government. And the golf course is simply around that. Walnut Creek has a few of those, where it's mostly wildlife area, and then the golf course kind of plays around it, which is very cool. But that's considered no play zones because they have the green topped stakes there. And it says the player must take relief, so you have to just take your penalty drop. And then 17.12, when a no play zone on the course interferes with stance or swing. So that was when the ball was in. If the ball's in even a little bit, so if it's on that line, you got to take your drop for one penalty stroke out of that, depending if it's yellow or red. That's when the ball's in there, we're done. And now we're looking at when a no play zone on the course interferes with stance or swing for a ball in a penalty area. Ball's still in the penalty area maybe, but the stance or swing is what's interfered with now, or we have interference from the no play zone. If a player's ball is in a penalty area and is outside a no play zone, but a no play zone, whether in an abnormal course condition or penalty area, you remember we looked last week at no play zones. It's either, if you have a no play zone, it's either abnormal course condition or penalty area. It has to be defined as one. Again, a good example of an abnormal course condition would be like a flower bed, a very nice decorative flower bed near the clubhouse. That is a no play zone conditioned as an abnormal course condition. And then in this case, we could have a no play zone that's a wetland or an ESA that's conditioned to be, hey, this is a penalty area and it's marked red or yellow. It says interferes with his or her area of intended stance or area of intended swing. The player must either, and again, you see must, meaning you must do it. There's no option here. Take penalty relief outside the penalty area in Rule 17.1D or 2, or take free relief by dropping the original ball or another ball in this very specific relief area if it exists. So the rules are even saying it may not even exist. If it doesn't, you're kind of slotted back to take penalty relief. If bullet point 2 is not available, you have to go to bullet point 1. You must go to bullet point 1 here. In the penalty area. So here, the relief area is in the penalty area. So this is a unique situation. It actually happened at the Rocky Mountain Open, I guess last year. Yeah, where there was a decorative flower bed in a no play zone. That was a no play zone in a penalty area. And we had a handful of players unbelievably hit it in here, which you wouldn't think they would, but they did just based on the layout of it. And this, we had to actually apply this rule. So this is actually where we actually had to use it and came in handy. The reference point is the nearest point of complete relief. Again, we're still in the same penalty area. If you have a no play zone in a penalty area, and maybe in this case, the entirety of the no play zone is not a penalty area, or the entirety of the penalty area is not a no play zone. It's just a penalty area. And within the penalty area, we have this decorative flower bed. Well, it can't be an abnormal course condition. And so therefore it must be a no play zone in a penalty area. So player takes relief, the relief area must be in that same penalty area. And the reference point is the nearest point of complete relief from the no play zone. So it could be flower bed here. And it says size of the relief area measured from the reference point is 1 club length, which is pretty standard, but with these limits. The relief area must be in the same penalty area, which we kind of inferred at the top there, where the ball currently lies, and must not be nearer the hole than the reference point, which again is pretty standard. So again, doesn't happen a lot, but we do have a situation here where a no play zone is inside a penalty area, and or a no play zone on the course interferes with the stance or swing for a ball in a penalty area. So the ball very specifically lies in penalty area, and then you have a no play zone on the course, and that could be outside the penalty area, inside the penalty area. So here, very complicated situation, to be honest, but you could have a situation where the stance is in a no play zone in the penalty area, in which case you have to keep it in the penalty area, and you do anyways, or you just take completely out and you go under number 1 and say, I'm just going to take my relief. I'm done here. I'm going to go to the edge of the penalty area, drop it under yellow or red, and go that way. So again, a little complicated here. And it says, but there's no free relief from interference from the no play zone under 2 when playing the ball as it lies would be clearly unreasonable. Something other than the no play zone. For example, the player's ball is unable to make a stroke. The player is unable to make a stroke because of where the ball lies in a bush. So it doesn't matter that there's a no play zone there. This player is kind of dead in the water anyways here. Or when interference exists only because the player chooses a club, type of stance or swing or direction of play that is clearly unreasonable under these circumstances. So the player is saying, well, I'm going to take this line of play to get their stance on a no play zone try to get free relief when that's very obviously unreasonable, and they're only doing it to try to gain free relief here. And this is for what to do when there's interference by a no play zone for a ball anywhere except in a penalty area. See Rule 16.1F, which is what we looked at last week. Whereas, again, there could be a decorative flower bed up by the clubhouse defined as an abnormal course condition that is free and mandatory. That's covered in 16.1F, which we saw last week. Again, we saw for playing a ball from a wrong place in breach of Rule 17.1 is the general penalty under Rule 14.7A. Again, earlier was saying you must play the ball here, you must do this. When it says that, it's inferring, and we're going to see this wording at the end of the rule to say, if you don't do that, you play out of that no play zone, you should have taken relief. The rule said you must. You've played from the wrong place, lost a hole in match play or 2-stroke penalty in stroke play. So yeah, that's the wrap up to that. Any questions for anything under 17.1 that I didn't cover? 17.2 is a little shorter, than 17.3 is essentially nothing at all. So any questions out there, Ashley, we need to look at before we move on?
Yeah, Robert, there's one in the chat here. Is the old opposite side of the lateral hazard option for relief no longer applicable for red penalty areas?
Good question. That yes and no. So it's an additional local rule the committee has to enact. So it's the same as kind of thinking about it as a drop zone. Used to be that was the standard. Yeah, the rules allow for that, but for that to be in play, the committee has to say, yes, on hole 16, the opposite side is in play. So if there's no mention of that, the player can't just utilize that relief option. It has to be put in play. Again, think about it as a drop zone too. You can't just make up your own drop zones. The committee has to say, yeah, on hole 17, there's a drop zone right here. In the same way, they would have to say the opposite side relief margin is also in play for the home. So it's still there, but it's a toggle on and off switch by the committee.
Nothing else in the chat, Robert.
Cool. All right. So 17.2, this is that regression rule where you're in a penalty area and okay, we'll play the ball, but you don't get it out of the penalty area. It comes to rest in the same penalty area or another penalty area and now it's really in the water. Now what do? How do you walk your way back out of this thing? So again, it's called a regression because you're walking backwards to get yourself back to hopefully a playable position. All right, so in 17.2a, it says when a ball played from a penalty area comes to rest in the same or another penalty area. So you could go, left side of the fairway and you mail it over to the right side of the fairway. That's another penalty area. 17.2a is applicable here. So penalty area to penalty area, same or different. If a ball played from a penalty area comes to rest in the same penalty area or another penalty area, the player may play the ball as it lies. So again, you want to try it again, you swing and miss or advance it a little bit in the same penalty area, you can keep going, that's fine. Or for one penalty stroke, the player may take relief under any of these options. And you have the normal relief options, which is, 17.2a1, and you have the extra relief option for playing the ball from where the last stroke was made outside of a penalty area. So when we say normal, it's kind of saying, well, what was covered under 17.1d? What are those options? Where did the ball last cross the penalty area that the ball currently lies in? And we'll walk through that. But 17.2a2, that's a unique one. That's just saying, wherever the stroke was last made. So it could be 200 yards down the fairway. You can still get out of jail that way. That's still fine. For normal relief options, says the player may take stroke and distance relief under Rule 17.1d1, back on a line relief under 17.1d2, or for a red penalty area. So it very much depends on what penalty area your ball is lying in. If it's yellow or red, you could take lateral relief under Rule 17.1d3. So under Rule 17.1d2 or 3, so that's back on a line in 17.1d2 or 3, which is lateral. The estimated point used to determine the relief area, so the reference point essentially, is where the original ball last crossed the edge of the penalty, where the ball now lies. So if you've hit it into a penalty area and you take a swing at it and bury it 10 feet deeper, when you use these relief options, okay, where did the ball last cross this penalty area? Well, it was coming in this way or wherever. that's your reference point for saying, okay, back on the line relief or lateral relief. If it's stroke and distance, while you're simply replaying it from the penalty area, in this case, we'll get to outside the penalty area in a moment. But again, if you're just going to pull it out, you've got a relief area or a reference point, because at one point your ball did last cross into a penalty area, or the penalty area you're now in. If the player takes stroke and distance relief by dropping a ball in the penalty area, see rule 14.6, which is that 1 club length plus, or reference point plus 1 club length, and then decides not to play the drop ball from where it comes to rest. So here, if I'm in a penalty area and I make a swing at it and I hit it even worse and it goes into the water in the penalty area or another penalty area, stroke and distance, I can play from where I last made a stroke, which is in that penalty area still. So I can just take another shot at it, drop it to 1 stroke penalty, put it back in play. But it's saying here, if I do that, and then I say, you know what, it rolled into a really bad lie, but it's in the relief area, so I'm obligated to play it, ball's in play, and then I don't want to play the drop ball where it came to rest. Again, this is because it's in a penalty area, not in any other area of the course. It's specific for penalty areas, very, very specific. The player may take further relief outside the penalty under Rule 17.1D, back on the line, or 3, lateral, for a red penalty area under Rule 17.2A2, which is, or under Rule 17.2A2, which is where the ball was last made a stroke at from outside the penalty area, right? So if the player does so, he or she gets 1 more penalty stroke for a total of 2 penalty strokes. And it goes on to say, so 1 stroke for taking stroke and distance relief. So I hit my ball from a penalty area, deeper into a penalty area. Okay, I'm going to try that again, drop my ball in the relief area. That's 1. Okay, that was a bad idea. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, I want to get it out using the 17.1D2 or 17.1D3, back on the line or lateral. I can still do that, but I've already put a ball in play. I've kind of laid my cards down. Okay, that's not a good hand. You got to do it again. That's another penalty stroke to get it out of the penalty area. Now, using those relief procedures, that's 2 penalty strokes. So the one that 2 is coming from, you put under stroke and distance, that's 1. Now, okay, I don't want to play that to get out. If you'd have just jumped straight to get out, you would have saved and you'd only had 1 penalty stroke for doing that, right? So again, by dropping it and saying, that was a bad idea, then taking relief out, that costs you an extra 1. So think about it before you do it if you're doing it. And then the 17.2A2, this is the extra relief option. So playing a ball from where the last stroke was made outside of a penalty area. So instead of using one of the normal relief options under 1, meaning stroke and distance in the penalty area, back on the line, outside, or lateral, the player may choose to play the original ball or another ball from where he or she made the last stroke from outside a penalty area. And this is Rule 14.6. And it says from outside of a penalty area, not the penalty area. So if I go penalty area to penalty area, if I use this rule, it's where did I last make a stroke to get me into the first penalty area, if that makes sense. But it says a penalty area here, not the penalty area. So it's where did you last make a stroke outside a penalty area. So if your ball is in a penalty area and you make a stroke at it, you've got essentially 4 options. If it's the lateral, if it's a red penalty area, you've got 4 options of how to get your ball out if you don't want to play it out, or if you've played it in deeper. Okay, stroke and distance, back on the spot, go outside, back on the line, go outside, lateral, or where did you last make a stroke from outside the penalty area? That's not great because it could be a tee shot. It's 300 yards that way. That's no good, but it does get you out. So that's a last resort usually, but it's still there. Again, really good picture in the rules here, and a really good explanation. So just like I was describing, player tees off from the teeing area there, goes into the penalty area. Again, where did it last cross at point X? That's the reference points in this case. So again, if I hit it to A, I play it to B. Okay, now it's really dead. B is just bad. I could drop it under 1. That's a penalty stroke. I could drop it under 2 or 3 there. Those options, back on the line and lateral, because this is a red penalty area. That's going to cost me a stroke. Or I can simply go right back and re-tee it. That's also going to cost me 1 penalty stroke. However, the rules, like we saw, said if I drop it under number 1 there, and I'd say I'm going to play it again, and it rolls within the relief area into a bad lie, I'm saying, well, now I'm dead. Or if it rolls into water in the penalty area, in the relief area, doesn't contemplate depth of water. It just says you dropped in the relief area, that ball's in play. not a good idea. I got to get it out. Now you can go to options 2, 3, or 4 for an additional 1-stroke penalty. Again, it's best served just to take your medicine the first time and get out, right? And again, we have a really good explanation underneath this. So in the rule book, it has that picture and then it has this. And I won't get into all of it, but it's essentially what I just said. And I think if you really want to understand it, this is really the best thing to read. And it's what I just outlined, but it's written down more so. And it goes through this. And when you're reading this, and it's all too small to really get on the same slide for PowerPoint, but if you just in your book, read this and look at the pictures at the as you're reading it, and it really does a good job of showing you the options here. So again, not going to read all of it. It's pretty dense, but it's a really good supplement to the picture. Really, really good, really helpful. All right, so in 17.2b, so now we have when a ball played from a penalty area is lost, out of bounds, or unplayable outside the penalty area. So in 17.2a, from penalty area to penalty area, or penalty area to the same penalty area, now we're looking at what if I'm in a penalty area and I hit it and it goes out of bounds? Well, out of bounds, as we know, or lost is, or even unplayable for stroke and distance, is stroke and distance, meaning where we just were. We're back to square one of playing from inside a penalty area. So how do we handle that? So after playing a ball from the penalty area, a player may sometimes be required or choose to take stroke and distance relief because of the original ball is either out of bounds or lost outside the penalty area. So in this case, we are required to take stroke and distance. There's not really a choice there. Or unplayable outside the penalty area, and we're using that stroke and distance option. You know, again, we talk about that in 2 weeks in Rule 19, but back on the line and lateral are no good for whatever reason, you might have to go back to the penalty area. If the player decides or then takes stroke and distance relief, whether by decision or requirement, by dropping a ball in the penalty area under Rule 14.6, so again, dropping it under stroke and distance, and then decides not to play the drop ball from where it comes to rest. So again, the player under stroke and distance, my penalty area hits it out of bounds. I got to drop it again, and it's in a really bad lie. Again, you know, the overall thought of 17.2 here is you can always get out of the penalty area at any point, because that extra relief option says you can, from the last stroke you made from outside a penalty, you can always go back to that. So this is always getting you out of the penalty area. It's pretty unique usually. You know, this isn't the case for a bunker or anything like that. You got to kind of play your way out here. It's yielding. You can always get out if you want to get out. If you really want to get out, the rules give you a way. And it's, you know, there's a lot of little intricacies here, but they do give you a way out. So the player may take further relief outside the penalty area under what we just saw, 17.1, 2, or 3. So 17.1d2, back on the line, or 3, lateral for a red penalty area, or under that extra option of 17.2a2 of dropping a ball where the last stroke was made outside of the penalty area. That's always available. So, and again, it does a really good job here of telling you how it goes. If the player does so, he or she gets one more penalty stroke, because again, we can't forget about the stroke and distance. Once your ball is lost or out of bounds, you have that penalty stroke hung on you. You've got that, can't get rid of it. So one more penalty stroke in addition to the stroke and distance one. So one more penalty stroke under 17.2 for a total of 2 penalty strokes. 1 stroke for taking stroke and distance, that never goes away, and then 1 more stroke for taking relief outside the penalty area. So if all you do is hit it out of bounds from the penalty area and then drop it again in the penalty area and play it out of there, you've just got that 1 stroke penalty for stroke and distance. However, if you know you're like, well, if I drop it again in the penalty area, I'm going to be in a bad way anyway. So I just want to get out. I want to get out of here. That's totally fine. The difference is, and we'll see it here, the player may directly take such relief outside the penalty area without first dropping a ball in the penalty area, but they still get the 2 strokes. So in the first example, when you're going penalty area to penalty area and you drop it under stroke and distance in the penalty area, okay, I didn't like that. We got 1 there. I'm going to go to lateral relief. Okay, that's 2, like we saw in the diagram. You still got that, and you've done it 1, 2. You can directly go out to lateral for just the 1 penalty stroke, but here you can do either. So you can kind of actually, I'll say test out your lie, but if you take stroke and distance relief in the penalty area and drop it, and it's in a good lie, play it. Great. If it's in a bad lie, and you want to go directly to lateral relief outside the penalty area, or a back on the line, or that extra relief option from where the last stroke was made outside of the penalty area, you can go to that. That's another 2. Or you can just go directly to that, but it's still going to cost you 2. So really, in any case, if you do any of those options of lateral, back on the line, or extra relief option, it's going to cost you 2 if that original ball was out of bounds, lost, or unplayable. So you might as well try dropping it on the original spot from the stroke was made, because if it ends up being in a good lie and you can make that stroke again, no harm, no foul, maybe. But to get it back out, okay, it's going to cost you 2 either way to get it out of the penalty area. So you might as well try it in there first. That's the opposite of what we saw in earlier, where if you try it and drop it and you don't like it and you get it out. So it very much depends on, was the ball out of bounds, lost, or unplayable, or was it in another penalty area? That's where it changes a little bit. That's where it gets a little unique. But again, there's really no harm, no foul, just to try and under stroke and distance after you've hit it out of bounds, lost, or have it unplayable for stroke and distance. So again, penalty for playing a ball from a wrong place under Rule 17.2 is the general penalty under Rule 14.7. So that's the wrong place one. So you play from a wrong place, you're getting that general penalty. That's it for 17.2. Any questions on that before we wrap up in the next minute or two here on 17.3? All right, 17.3. And this isn't even really a rule, honestly. It's more of a catch-all. It says no relief for other rules for a ball in a penalty area. So it says that when a player's ball is in a penalty area, there is no relief for interference by an abnormal course condition under Rule 16.1. We covered that last week. No relief for an embedded ball. So if your ball is embedded in the penalty area, there's no relief for free. You know, the embedded ball is only for a ball in the general area. If it is embedded in the penalty area, you can take a hack at it, or you've got all those options we just talked about for a ball known or virtually certain to be in the penalty area. And an unplayable ball. You can't take unplayable in a penalty area and say, I'm going to drop it within 2 club lengths where the ball lies. That's Rule 19. We cover that in 2 weeks. We've got the penalty area rule. We've got all that stuff in Rule 17 that we just covered that is applicable for that. So an unplayable ball in a penalty area is not a thing. And the player's only relief option under any of those is to take penalty relief under Rule 17, unless they want to try to play it. You know, if your ball is on a sprinkler head in a penalty area, you don't get relief for that. But if you want to try to play it, you can. The other relief option is, well, you just 1-stroke penalty and take it out. So, and it says, but when a dangerous animal condition interferes with the play of a ball in a penalty area, the player may take either free relief in the penalty area or penalty area relief outside the penalty area, which we covered in depth last week in 16.2. All right, so that's Rule 17. Again, 17.3 is really not much other than a catch-all. So any questions on anything in Rule 17, or any just questions about another rule of golf you want to talk about? And Ashley, do we have anything in the chat?
We do not.
All right. So no questions on any penalty areas out there? If you have a question, you can unmute. If not, totally fine. All right. Well, next week is Rule 18, which is a big one. That one's out of bounds and lost ball and provisional, and we'll talk about the new out of bounds because everyone wants to talk about that with the equidistant and bouncing outside. So yeah, we'll have that next week in Rule 18 on Monday at 9 o'clock. So this will be posted to the website here shortly. Thank you everyone for coming out. And if you have any questions, always feel free to email me or call me. My email is just rduke@coloradogolf.org. And yeah, be happy to help. So thank you again for coming out, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.